Guys, this is third episode of the second series of event industry survival tales, and today with us Kevin and Rich, and we will discuss questions about hosting like non-profit events around communities. So in this particular case, the community, I think most of the time we will speak about Apache Foundation. Is it correct?
Yeah.
Software Foundation.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, because the experts that we have today wear multiple hats. Some of those quite literally, right? So I'll just, I have my handy list here. So we'll just do formal introductions, and then we'll give you a chance to sort of just introduce yourself as well. So we have Kevin McGrail, who is the principal evangelist for DTO, and also a volunteer of several decades for Apache Software Foundation.
Certainly been involved for a while.
Yeah. Okay. And then we are fortunate to have Rich Bowen today with us, who is a VP of Conferences for ASF, as well as community architect for Red Hat and community manager for CentOS Project. As
right.
And we can see CentOS logo is on the T-shirt there, and hopefully today we'll get to talk about conference swag, because this is obviously a very important aspect of any successful conference, and I'm sure that the pandemic has had interesting impact there. So anyway, just wanted to do the intros, and shall I just go ahead with the first question, Kirill?
Yeah, please.
So the first thing that we like to do in this series is we like to get on board our special ConferenceCast time machine, and we will travel back to March 2020, because this is the time in all of our, I guess, shared history when a lot of things changed. So let's travel back in time, and if both Kevin and Rich, you could share with us March 2020, I guess mid-March 2020, when the global pandemic got to a point where it's really impacted day to day of most people. Let's talk about that impact on the work that you do with ASF as well as with your clients. What changed and what immediate impact? I guess let's talk about the immediate impact, and then we'll unpack kind of as the year progressed what happened next.
Shall I go first, Rich?
Yeah, that would make sense. You go first.
Yeah. So I'm not sure this pandemic thing. I'm not sure what you're referring to, but no. Back in March, I was the first show up for the ASF in late March in this area, DC, which is where I live, and it was one of our regional road shows, but still pretty well attended. And we had to cancel it, and we had to cancel it fairly late in the stage. So it was only about 2-3 more weeks to go until it was happening. And I think one of the biggest takeaways that I had was that the speakers and a lot of the people weren't sure this was going to be a big problem yet. People weren't aware of how impactful it was going to be on lives. And so we actually had quite a few speakers that were angry. They would not support going to a digital format from the planned event that we had in person. So that's probably the biggest takeaway I had in March, was that there was so much uncertainty, so much lack of planning, so much we had to make decisions. And so the ASF, I'm very proud of it. Rich and I talked a lot about it before we finally decided to cancel it. And we were probably the third company in the planet that started really canceling road shows or canceling conferences. And then a week or two later, the rest of the world started following suit. But in the US, it was very, very early in the process.
Mm-hmm. And would you say that, again, leading up to March 2020, when it comes to the work that you do with ASF, so would you say that in-person conferences played a big role in how you guys engage with your community? Like, how big of a deal was that you had to cancel that event?
Sorry, I think it was, it's a pretty big deal for us. I'm sorry, I've got a phone ringing. I don't know how to mute it. So we work a lot asynchronously, so we work a lot on email lists, but, our events are a pretty big deal. We usually only have a few of them a year. And so people go out of their way to show up at them. It's a time when friends can talk to each other and people can see each other. And so it was a pretty big deal. It's difficult. It's been much harder in the commercial sector. We're a nonprofit, and so for us, it's not as impactful. But like in the commercial sector, in my day job, for example, that was one of the primary sources for us to talk to customers, to get leads, to just to have a rapport with customers, sit down and have a lunch or a meal, and have more than 10 minutes to talk to people sometimes. So a lot of impact there.
That's also an important place where our sponsors get in front of the community. And, the software license that the Apache Software Foundation works with is very business friendly. And so there's a lot of businesses, small and large businesses, that base their whole thing on Apache software. And this is an opportunity for them to get in front of both the developers and the users and kind of promote their organizations and their products. And so they were kind of a big deal that way. So from my perspective, the other thing that was happening in this time frame, this March time frame you're talking about, was Kevin's conference. Kevin's roadshow in DC was one of 3 events that we were talking about doing. Probably 4, depending on how you count. One of them was still spinning up, and the one that impacted my mental health the most was that we had a venue booked in New Orleans for an in-person event in September. And when you book a venue, there's a lot of money involved. There's contracts involved. And it was in September. And in March, everyone knew that by September, this would be behind us. We all knew that. There was no doubt in our minds. And it seems very naive now, but at the time, that's what we knew. And so there were a few of us, and myself and the president and the board decided that we needed to get out of this contract. But the hotel where we had the venue booked was not amenable to that idea. And it took months and a lot of work and sweat and tears to get out of that. And myself and Ruth Seeley and a number of other people within the organization spent many hours trying to get out of this conference. The other events that we had lined up were in Chicago and Seattle. They had financial impact to cancel their venues, but it was much smaller because they were smaller events.
Yeah, and there was financial impact.
So financial impact, sponsorships, and kind of friendships, and loss of kind of that community building aspect. Sounds like those were the kind of the 3 main.
As I heard, like also we can take into consideration that impact that companies who used to build their businesses on top of Apache software were hit, because as Rick said, they used to use conferences as a place to maintain and develop their business.
That's right.
They were they lost this opportunity in a moment. So I think it had some much wider or bigger consequences for the business.
That's right. In the open source space, there's 2 main kinds of conferences that I go to, that I work for. One is these community events where the impact is primarily on the community and not so much on the financial side. The other, wearing my other hat, my red hat at work, we do a lot of conferences that are commercial conferences. And as Kevin mentioned, there's business deals that happen there. And when you sit down at a restaurant with somebody, your deals are much more likely to be successful than when you're doing it over a choppy internet connection video call.
Yeah. 4x, I think, is generally the metrics that we found. 4 times more likely to happen. Plus, there's other things like, people go to conferences and they take a day at the conference to take some certification tests. People are doing job hiring. So there's other things as well. You can't find staff that you would normally find at these events, and find people that that are passionate about what you're working on. So,
yeah.
Okay. So maybe let's, and so that was March. And so obviously the impact was pretty strong. As the year kind of progressed, I don't know if you could just go into kind of some of the ways that, and we are interested in both kind of the good, bad, kind of the lessons learned. Was there anything that you managed to sort of overcome, and is there anything that sort of remains painful to these days. Maybe so. Let's kind of move past March into kind of when pandemic almost became kind of business as usual.
So I mentioned in our previous conversation that I attend a lot of conferences. It's a major part of my job. I attend and plan and present at and run booths at conferences almost every month. And for all of those conferences that I go to, the most valuable part of the conference, as we've alluded to already, is the interpersonal interactions. And so when I was looking for an event platform, that aspect of it, the hallway track, as we call it, was something that we wanted to see that the platform had a solution for. And, in the March, April, May timeframe last year, nobody did. They did. They had sort of you could have an informal video chat, but it wasn't really an emphasis. The emphasis was on high quality presentations with slides that you present to a large audience. And that's valuable, but it's not what most of us go to conferences primarily for. And so to me, that was what I was looking for. And what we've seen over the past year is conference platforms build out that aspect of their platform. And also we've seen a number of acquisitions where some of the small players in this field have bought up other players, and the platforms are becoming more full featured. And we anticipated that. We anticipate more of that to come. And by the time we're done with the pandemic, there's going to be some really robust online platforms. And that's something we're going to talk about later, is this hybrid model. So I won't go into that area of it. But that's what I thought was most important to look for.
Yeah, and I know something that we've talked about as well was on the positive was just how well we've been able to bring more people into the events. Mm-hmm. I know Rich has talked about the diversity, but also I'm routinely talking to people all the way around the globe at these events that couldn't have afforded or couldn't have gotten the travel permits and whatnot to travel to New Orleans, for example. So now we're able to talk to people that are all around the world. Has been really game changing, I think, for these type of events as well.
Another thing that I'd mention on the good and bad side, when we started doing events online in March and April and early last year, it was exciting, it was new, it was fun. We had huge participation, huge attendance. And then it got tiresome. I spend 6 hours of every day looking at other faces on the screen, and it's not social time. We're not hanging out. We're not being together. We're doing work. And the idea of attending 6 hours of completely non-interactive one-way presentations, somebody talking at me through the screen, it's wearisome now. And there was one of my favorite events all year was last week, the FOSS Asia event, the open. And it's just such a wonderful event. I love it every year. And I found myself struggling to attend those sessions, not because the sessions weren't awesome, because they were, but just the screen fatigue. You'll hear it. You'll hear some of our kids' teachers talk about the screen fatigue, and I'm feeling it just as strongly as my daughter is.
By the way, does it make sense? How do you watch a conference using your laptop screen, or let's say you have your wide, huge screen like TV, your TV on the wall, and you're watching like sitting on your couch? So, does it make sense or not?
Yeah, I've done both of those things. Yeah. Sometimes I'm sitting here in my office, and sometimes I'm out on the veranda with my laptop or walking around the neighborhood with my phone. But you got to mix it up, otherwise it does get really wearisome.
Yeah, and it's interesting. A lot of people, the screen fatigue. A lot of people feel very stressed about being on camera because they feel like they have to be on point all the time, and people might be staring up the whole time. I mean, you just have to get older like me and just not care. But that comes with age. I don't think with practice. So, yeah.
But another interesting part about that is, in the spring of last year, when a lot of the TV talk show hosts started broadcasting from their home instead of from a studio, some of them couldn't do it. They would tell a joke and then there would be an awkward silence because they're used to hearing the audience laughing. Yeah. And it came across very, very dry, and we're seeing the same thing in conferences. Some people, well, most of us get a lot of energy out of the audience when we're speaking. I love being on stage. I love interacting with the audience, and trying to give a presentation to myself on my screen. It doesn't matter that the number in the corner of the screen is 200. I don't see those people.
Yeah, it's very difficult. The hardest conferences for me to speak to for years, in fact, pre-pandemic, has been what I call the dead air, where they say, okay, you're going to record your speech, and you go and you talk for an hour, and you don't know if you're hitting, you don't know if 20 people would have raised their hands and you would have pivoted to kind of explain something a little better, or, you know, something. So yeah, that lack of interactivity is something I know I miss. So
yeah, that's true. Okay, so like while we're talking, so we are talking about platforms. Could you please share what platforms have you used? I mean, so if there were many, you can like name some of them, but it's interesting like how you made your choice and how you evolved. I mean, maybe if it was some changes in terms of like platform you used to use like last year.
When we did our major business, our major Red Hat conference, we used a fairly high-end platform that was expensive and full-featured, and that made sense because we had a huge audience. When I was making the decision, both for the Apache Software Foundation and for the CentOS Project, cost was more of an issue, but at the same time, you want to make sure that it's accessible in China, in Africa, in South America. So they have to have regional spots. Anyway, what we went with was a platform called Hopin, and we've been very pleased with it for a number of reasons. One is that it's a good platform with all the tools that you need, but the part that's impressed me the most is how responsive they are to bug reports, criticism, feedback, and how quickly they implement those things that are missing. So I'll be using Hopin again this year for our Apache event, but it's a much better platform than it was a year ago due to that responsiveness.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, there's not a I mean, I don't think you could easily name a platform that I haven't used. I mean, Huawei's platform and Blue Jeans and Zoom and Meet and but you know, Remo is one that I liked. Hopin is another one that I liked. I actually like ConferenceCast. I know Kirill and you know, Kira work for them. A great way of adding a long tail to the conference content as good as well. So, and I think we'll see more value in that. You know, YouTube is a great place to throw things up there, but it doesn't give the conference feel to those archives.
And I'd also mention Jitsi, which is an open source platform.
An open source one. Excellent.
That, not only can you host it yourself if you have sufficient bandwidth, but there's a number of providers out there that provide very low cost hosting, as well as free to some open source projects in certain circumstances.
Yeah, you know, I have very interesting observation about the online platforms price modeling. So, you know, in this conference world, we have two types of conferences. One is a public conferences, and usually there are two types in there. I mean, like nonprofit and commercial. Nonprofit try to save money, like spend as less as possible. So a commercial try to earn like as much as possible. So they have different models, but anyway, so they have some limits in their with their budgets, how much they can spend for, like before it was for venue, now it's like for virtual venue, for a platform. A second type of conferences are commercial conferences that's are organized by commercial companies, for marketing purposes. So, and they have like literally unlimited budget. So, and there are many, so there are thousands, maybe tens of thousands. And those platforms which are serving this market, of course, they are like focused on the second player. So because they could make more money, and all their like pricing policy is focused on getting money from this enterprise clients. And it's make it's create a situation when like traditional public conferences couldn't afford to use some platforms, or like those platforms they have to use because, like, I don't know, like a contract signed before, or their audience preferences. So they have to pay a lot of money just to so they don't have this advantage of shift online. So because before it was the most popular well spread opinion that with a move with a transition online, most event organizers won because they spend less money, all this logistics is easier. But in most cases, not in most, in some, not in the majority, but in some cases, I've heard the feedback from event organizers that those platform services are too expensive for them to continue. Yeah. What could you say about this?
Embrace open source, support Jitsi. Open source software, which I know Rich and I are very passionate about, has changed the way we compute over the last 22 years. The Apache Software Foundation just turned 22 years old in the last few days. And, if you look back 22 years ago, everything you're saying was what everybody said about other software. And, open source is a way to change that. It's a great equalizer. It's a great way of ending a dual class system where enterprise and, nonprofits and, first world and third world countries, can meet in the middle to have great, amazing software that changes the way the world computes. And thank you for that softball question about open source software.
But also market forces in the last year have we mentioned earlier, there were so many platforms to choose from. And that's resulted in price reductions. I can plug Hop in here. Their price structure is very reasonable for small organizations. What the model that we took was to make optional ticket prices. You could pay our minimal amount, or you could pay more if you wanted to support us and help us offset costs. With some of my CentOS events, it's a free event, but you can pay for tickets if you want to cover the costs. And that's sufficiently covered costs. And 10 years ago, online conference platforms were exorbitantly expensive and something that I would never have considered for our Apache events. A few years ago, we started looking into streaming the content online, and that's incredibly expensive. Depending on the facility that you're in. Some facilities, like if you host this at a university, they might already have that equipment on site. If you host it at a convention center, you're going to have to pay extra for it.
Yeah.
And the online experience, one of the big positives of it is that this is just how it works. Anybody can attend from home. People can attend who would never travel, as you mentioned before. And one of the other big advantages has been the access to speakers that would never have traveled to an event. And in the Apache event last year, we had presentations in Spanish and in German, and for the first time we had presentations in Hindi, which was really exciting to me because it opened up a new audience, both an audience and speakers that we simply never had access to before. It was really cool.
Yeah, I'm personally hoping that the platforms do evolve. We do get to a good place because there are a lot of pros to it. For example, I'm not even wearing pants right now, but there's a lot of savings. You don't have the logistics. You don't have the cost of plane tickets. The scheduling is a little easier. You don't have to procure merchandise. You have employees that couldn't go otherwise. But on the con side, there is, one of the things I find right now, and I haven't talked about this, so I'd be curious if some of you share the same experience. But, for example, this week I spoke at and attended a 4-day conference. It was wonderful, called Inbox Expo. And consistently throughout that 4 days, my time that was blocked off kept getting chipped away. And they pulled me into a meeting for an hour. And they pulled me into another meeting for an hour. And so what I used to get to go to a conference for 2 or 3 days and learn and meet people gets very fractured by this online concept. The other thing I'll mention, and this is just a great little idea, I think this came from the Foundation Leadership Open Source Software, a group called Floss. Rich might know the source of it, but I know we had this problem as well. We tried to ship out swag to people that attended the conference, and we were getting hit with very exorbitant fees. We were getting hit with duties and customs. And so we were getting return packages back, and people were literally calling us. We were sending them like a $20 t-shirt, and they were sending us notes that they were being asked for like $100 equivalent to get the thing out of duties and customs and whatnot, or delivery fees, or whatever. And somebody came up with a great idea, which we have used brilliantly, which is we ship iron-ons. So we print like the swag, and we will give them a PayPal money to go buy a T-shirt and put an iron-on onto a T-shirt, or we'll put up the SVG. They can download and go get it printed themselves locally, support local vendors, local textiles, and not get hit with those things. But that was an interesting. You talk about lessons learned. That one was huge, and I think a number of companies found that. So, Rich.
I'd like to ask like a question. Sorry, like how
I was just going to ask Rich. Do you remember that? I think that was the floss was where that story came up as well, and we were talking about it, right?
It could be, and I've experienced that with a number of my events too, where I try to ship something to somebody, and it turns out that they're in a country where it's going to cost so much more in customs than the thing is worth, and so yeah, I experienced that this week, in fact. So.
Yeah. What about digital clothes? Because I think we're moving into an era where we just have virtual clothes now.
Open source digital clothes.
Yeah, digital clothes where you just buy, you could just have that logo. Anyway, I digress.
We're going to be, what are we going to talk about? Non-fungible tokens now for Apache logos to put on your shirt?
So moving on.
Yeah. I'd like to ask another question about speakers. Like what has changed for them? So from the one hand, on the one hand, we have this opportunity. We've got this opportunity to call speakers from all over the world, and like it costs you almost nothing. And for people who wanted to speak on a conference, it's a huge opportunity to realize their dreams. On the other hand, we have so speakers used to have how to say it, off stage conversations after their sessions. Yes. That was available because of offline format. And as I understood, and as I understand, like on online platforms, this opportunity vanished. So it is not available. So to catch somebody on his jacket and ask some questions or have a drink with him. So from this perspective, and this is a question to you as a speakers. So could you tell us, is it true? I mean, is it really a problem, or just like I made it up? And how organizers try to solve it? Because it's one of the things why speakers are used to attend conferences, to have this in-person contact with their audience.
And that's definitely the case, and it's the way that I've tried to address it in my events is to and I did this wrong the first time. I would have a session end, and immediately the next session would begin, and that cuts off all opportunity for question and answer. And what I've started to build into all of my events is an intentional gap between sessions, so that some people, their sessions will run long, and that's just the way that sessions go in the real world too. But to intentionally build in that question and answer time. And when they're done speaking, you say, all right, if you have questions, please stick around and use this time to engage with your audience, to engage with your speaker. And then the other thing that we do is we intentionally have what we call the hallway track, where you have another session room that's just open mic and open camera, and people can go in there and have a chat. Now, one of the downsides
without any moderation, without any moderation,
just and one of the there's two downsides to that. One is that it's open for abuse for people to use that inappropriately, and so having moderation, having somebody there to moderate the conversation is actually something I recommend. The other thing is that if you simply have an open room, nobody's going to show up, and so what I recommend. Yeah, I mean, if you go into a room and you're alone, you're going to wait for about 10 seconds and then you're going to leave. And so what I recommend is that every one of your hallway track rooms, every one of these open sessions, you have 2 to 3 volunteers that just hang out there all day talking about, their hobbies, their beer making hobby, their car collection, whatever, so that when somebody comes into the room, it feels engaging, and they feel like they're welcome to come and sit at the table and talk about things. and they don't feel awkward. So those are two very intentional steps that I've taken in my events that I got wrong the first time.
Yeah, well, don't be too hard on yourself, because Rich has a lot of great ideas. Like, for example, one of the things we are missing, I think, what I would call the keynote draw. The ability to get a keynote or two that would really draw some people into the event. And Rich taught me something which I love, which he's like, I like books. So when I'm looking for a keynote, I find a book I like and I reach out to that author and see if I can get him to do a keynote. And, like, I know I've talked to Ernst Klein, and I know he spoke at one of our previous events. I talked to him. I got some really cool cyber speakers that did the DC event as well. So you figure out other ways to pivot it. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting problem with that, because, people may not show up as much. And, I think that to some extent we'll segue into something else I think we'll talk about with, like, what's the draw for next year, so kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, selecting keynotes is kind of my selfish way of meeting the people that are my heroes, and I've met a lot of them over the years that way. So.
And I've also learned never meet your heroes. I just have to say that right now. If you've never heard that advice, don't meet your heroes.
Yeah, let's change the topic. So let's talk about recordings. So like, one of the huge benefits of having events online, that recordings now, of the process of creating of recordings now costs almost nothing. So it's part of a platform functionality that I think available everywhere. So, like, that doesn't matter if it's like a huge expensive platform, or like Zoom, which you'll like pay how many, like few, like $20-$30 a month, like, to have it. So you could have these recordings and download it, and even with in a good quality. So my question is, like, to you, what possibilities recordings gave you? Because I know that before pandemic, you tried to record your conferences, and it was like not a piece of cake question. So because of the venues, of the cost of video production, all the stuff, you tried to do your best. Some of your conferences were recorded completely, some of them not. So, like, how it's changed for you with COVID, and what is your strategy with recordings, and what do you think about the future of the recordings?
Yeah, so there's several aspects to that. One is that I do a conference, and it's over dramatic to call it a conference. I do an event in Brussels every year, and we have 2 meeting rooms in a hotel, and I can take my little camcorder and set it up on a tripod in those rooms and record those sessions, and that works pretty well. However, when you do a conference, like a real large-scale conference, you run into all sorts of problems. Most hotels will not let you bring your own cameras in. You have to hire the in-house videography crew, which doubles the price of your event. And this varies enormously from venue to venue and country to country. Many places in Europe have no problem with me bringing my cameras in. Most places in the United States, it's forbidden. And in many places, like I won't call out any particular cities, but many places in the United States are explicitly union cities. And so you have to you can't bring in an external company to do the recording. You have to hire the local company to do it. That's the law. It's not just the rules of the hotel. And so there's a lot of complexities involved in recording events in the past. Like you say now, when we do online events, you press record, and that's the extent of it. And when I do events for CentOS, I will typically have 200 people show up, and then 3,000 people watch the video online. And so to me, it's an obvious way to amplify your audience, and also to time shift. It's a way to take that content and reuse it in other forms as well. There's so many benefits to that. Yeah. Going forward, the third part of your question, we're going back to that old model where recording stuff on site is complicated, but I don't want to lose this new audience that I've gained, right? And I don't know how I'm going to do this. There's a lot of companies that are promoting solutions to this, but they're expensive and they are venue dependent. Some venues that I book in will not allow me to use that external company. And so I'm looking for solutions to this problem as well. I don't know what I'm going to do next year when we go back to in-person events. The number of events that we did at work, we would have volunteers bring their laptop and their tripod and their tripod and their camcorder and do that in the room and try and slip under the radar doing that, because it's individuals doing it, not the organization. Always felt shady to me, but it's one possible way to do it. And then you have different quality of recordings. Anyway, I'm rambling. I'm really looking for solutions to this as well.
Yeah, because there's other problems too, like the one that I run in all the time. All the ones you talked about, unions, locations, is bandwidth costs. We'll ask for bandwidth. We'll ask for bandwidth, and they'll be like, "Oh, we'll give you the most amazing bandwidth ever. We'll give you an entire megabit, and it'll only cost you $10,000 a day." And you're like, "Oh, yeah."
Wow.
And those are real numbers that we've been quoted. So he's not making it up.
No, and by the way, just for those who are watching this, if you're not aware, in the U.S., they typically will give you the rooms and the space for free, but you have to hire their services. And in many European countries, it's the exact opposite, that you have to pay for the rooms and then the other stuff comes free. So that's one of the interesting things that you get booking conferences internationally versus, in your domestic nations, is what's the pricing model that the particular venues use. But I love doing ASF events because I'm not bashful. I'll go talk to a college, and most colleges have good bandwidth. They're willing to work with you. They love the events. They're happy to do things like the ASF event that I know you helped clean up the videos, in fact, for. They had, students do the work, and I think they charged us $350 to do all the recordings. That's
the limit there is you have to do it when school's not in session. So.
There is some. Well, some of the schools that I work with have venues for that, so we were able to do it. But yeah, parking becomes a problem if you do it during normal school days and things like that. So yeah, there are everything has its pros and cons, but at least it's not $10,000 a megabit. So.
Yeah. By the way, do you think that the development of the cellular connection, this 5G technology, and the development of evolving of price modeling of carriers will help, like in a short future, to replace this wired connection with the
the many of the hotels, actually, there's like a company in the US that's called Cell Block 9 that exists to block cell signals in prisons, and several of the conferences use those. They'll put them in their venues, so if you don't pay for Wi-Fi, your Wi-Fi is dead, and they'll kill everything in that room or in that area.
You even can call. They make calls.
They are able to do the spectrum, so they allow calls and stuff like that, because they get in trouble if you can't make a 911 emergency call. But yeah, it is considered legal, I think, as long as you don't go outside those boundaries and it's in the terms of service and everything. So yeah, they'll kill Wi-Fi signals, because people will try and do things. They're like, oh well, I'll pay for 10 megabits over here on the conference show floor, and then we'll just use a Wi-Fi router to make it work in the rooms. And like, hey, how come it doesn't work over here? And it's like, oh yeah, we jammed that signal, over here, so nice. You can't get anything there.
Dark sides of hosting conferences.
I know. Yeah. Wow, eye-opening.
Yeah. So they have to make their money some way, and they're pretty draconian about their bandwidth. So yeah.
They charge you for a place, for the food.
Well, and I'm not anti-union. I don't want to sound like it, but unions are very specific on what their responsibilities are. And so, I once took duct tape and taped a cable down and got yelled at for taking away a gaffer's job, I think is what that person is called, that literally comes around and tapes down cables. So it's and a lot of hotels, if you're in major cities that have unions, New York City, Las Vegas come to mind, San Francisco. They're very, very driven by that. So there's deals with the hotels, there's the people you have to use, et cetera. And it's just part of the role of running a conference. But doing it in the open source world, it does add complications. So I don't want to be anti that, because I've run many, many, many successful, great conferences in those cities. But it is sometimes a surprise to people who haven't done it before.
So I suggest to move to the next topic. So I'd like to discuss the shift in your, if we can talk about this, in your like fundings, or I mean, so source that funds your conference. So before the pandemic, donations and sponsorships was an important revenue channel for ASF. And
Yes.
how has it changed with COVID?
So I've been working with the Apache conferences since the early 2000s, and we've never viewed it as an income source.
Yes.
It's part of our outreach. It's okay. Not. Yeah, there are some open source organizations that use, like the Python Foundation uses their conference as one of their main fundraisers. We've never viewed it that way. So that said, it's always been primarily a funded by ticket sales and by sponsors, as you mentioned. Last year, we had the same model. The difference is that we didn't have to pay for a venue or for catering or for transportation for our team. And so we were able to charge less for our tickets. Again, we're not trying to make a huge profit on this. We're trying to come out ahead, but we're not trying to make it one of our income sources. And so the impact there was that we were able to adjust our expense to our attendees. And I think as a direct result, instead of having 500 or 600 attendees, we had 5,000 or 6,000 attendees. And to me, that is a huge benefit of this new reality. You know, for all the trade-offs, the ability to open this to a much larger audience has been really positive to me.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head. If you use conferences as a primary source of income to run your organization, you're in trouble. If you use it like us as part of our educational outreach and our community building, the cost went down, so our income went down accordingly. And what's interesting, like for example, I've done a lot of conference prospectuses and sold to sponsors, and it's funny that like the two ones that you get fights over. In fact, 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, I had to go and look at the timestamps on the emails because they were all within the same minute for 3 respondees when I opened the prospectus, who all wanted the lanyard. They wanted their company on the lanyard that everybody wears around their neck. So that's like, so we've lost that, they don't get that. And then usually the badge, like sometimes that's a big one. But what's become an interesting one that I know one vendor, and I'll say thank you to them, is Comcast has really stepped up a number of times for this, is they pay for the branding on the recording. So they get a little bug with the, like sponsored by Comcast, and they pay for those post-production fees and things like that. So we are seeing some benefits from the ability just to hit record. Some sponsors that are willing to work with us there, they do see our altruistic vision of what the Software Foundation does. And, luckily our costs have gone down, but Rich is, I feel bad for the organizations. Like I do know one, for example, that has this exact problem where 2 years now, they won't be able to run their main conference that is their main source of income, and they will not survive. They don't have an income stream to replace it. And it's their primary source of their funding.
Kevin mentions another point that we haven't really touched on before, and that is the benefit of conferences to sponsors. We mentioned how sponsors use this for talent acquisition and to get their names out. In online platforms, things are not great right now for sponsors because you have the notion of a booth in the online conference space, but attracting attendees to actually come and listen to you is very challenging in online platforms. In the old days, you had swag. You give away the T-shirts and people come listen to you in order to receive the T-shirt.
Or you put the coffee on the other side of the booth.
Right. So there's the stick and carrot. But on an online platform, now what we've seen is that some of these organizations, one of the organizations that sponsored us for ApacheCon last year, I believe it was Apple. They just had such an engaging booth experience. They had interactive presentations. They had kind of a contest game show kind of thing that you could go participate in, and they came out well. But others of our sponsors are used to the model where you get a sponsor booth and you show up and you stand there, and nobody came. And so sponsors as well are learning a lot from these online events about how to better promote themselves. This isn't, oh, this is a bad thing and we shouldn't do it anymore. These sponsors are really stepping up and trying to learn how to better engage at events. And, again, with my other hat, my red hat, when we sponsor events, we look very closely at what the online platform offers to the sponsor to see whether it's going to be worth our time. Is it just a billboard? Is it just a YouTube video? Probably not going to be very interested, but we're looking for something that's really interactive and allows you to engage with the audience in a meaningful way.
Right. Well, this is an amazing segue to my next question, which was going to be around audience engagement, which obviously is huge, whether you're looking to attract sponsors or whether you're looking to build community and kind of keep the community going the way, what you're doing with ASF. Any positives, negatives there, engaging with your audience online? Because, obviously building community is such a huge part of what you do with ASF.
Yeah. The challenge is that it's so subjective, right? You go to a conference, like I said, I go to a lot of conferences, and after every conference, we write an event report. And part of that was this worth our time? Was this worth our plane tickets? And that is extremely subjective. And, I have my own metric is, how many meaningful conversations did I have with attendees as I was standing at the booth? Or was it just people shuffling by, refusing to make eye contact so that they can get my t-shirt?
Right.
And I count those things. While I'm at a conference booth, I'm actually counting these things and using that to judge whether I'm going to pony up for the sponsorship next year. And it's hugely subjective. There's some conferences where I come back from it feeling just so energized, and others I feel like, well, I got another plane trip under my belt. So
yeah.
So I wonder what's the equivalent of just building on what you said, how you have the subjective, refusing to make eye contact, grab the t-shirt, go, and actually happening. Like, what would be the virtual equivalent of that behavior? Or kind of, I'm not here, I'm just, just kind of, what would be, kind of, I guess, like the lack of engagement? How does that show up in the virtual environment? Just logging on and kind of being on mute the whole time and just like not saying anything?
Well, it's even more stark in the online platform, because if people aren't going to talk to you, they just don't show up. They don't click your link. They don't show up in your chat window. And so there have been conferences where we would go back and review the chat content, and 98% of it was us talking amongst ourselves, talking with coworkers. And then there's other events that there's technical questions, there's hiring questions. Those are always the top two categories. And you have some really engaging conversations and maybe even some arguments about some decision that your project has made. I've been seeing a lot of that in the last year. But it feels less subjective in the online platform, because if people don't engage, you don't see them.
Yeah, it's what we call a positive bounce rate. I used to have a company that was named Hardware, and it was after computer hardware. But we would have people call us all the time for 2x4s and lag bolts and just things they would buy at a hardware store. And so when we renamed the company to be Computer Consultants, all of a sudden, that we no longer had people calling us for things that we didn't want to talk to. So there is some positives in this, that you're not talking to people that aren't engaged, that they aren't that important. And it's, like, for example, I have a child with autism. So if I go to an autism event and I'm working that booth, I have a very, very minor metric, which is if I came back and I changed one parent's life with their child, I'm happy. And so I've gone to conferences and literally sat there for 3 days, and then finally had like a 45-minute conference talk with one parent. And I felt like I've made a change in their life or their child's life. And that's all worth it. And, with companies, branding, for example, so what, they didn't look at you. They grabbed 8 billion shirts. If they wear your red hat shirt, it's free advertising. So, there is a benefit to that. But sometimes it does feel like you're like, all I am is a shirt handing out monkey. So,
I just love how conference swag shows up as this huge thing in this conversation. This is definitely, this is t-shirts are very important. I'm just aware of the time, and I wasn't sure if, I guess we should be picky about where we go next in terms of questions. Did we want to discuss hybrid next?
Yeah, let's discuss hybrid. I have some maybe questions I will ask, maybe not. Depends on what you say. Yeah, so you're gonna say, let's discuss this new format that is going to, that is coming. So because I was thinking about this recently, and came to a conclusion, kind of some idea, some thought popped in my mind that because of this, I know how to say, hybrid is expensive. Mm-hmm. Hybrid is expensive because you have to host 2 conferences at the same time, and also hybrid requires you some special skills, and this it's completely not completely, but I think it makes your budget doubles your budget. So, and from my perspective, because of this, after in-person events becomes safe enough to attract people in the same amount as we have it before the pandemic. So I think some of event organizers will go back to only in-person events because they know how to do them, and it doesn't require from them some new to learn something new. So, and from the on the other hand, conferences and most of conferences that are organized by corporations will continue running hybrid events because they saw this opportunity to extend their audience significantly in comparison with what they had before, and they will never lose this opportunity. I mean, even if it costs them double or triple price. So that's my vision. So and on the other hand, with those event organizers who succeed to survive during 2020, so they will have this experience of this taste of wider audience online, mm-hmm. and they will try to somehow get access to keep this audience even not running hybrid events. So my question is, what do you think about hybrid format? I mean, especially specifically for non-profit conferences and commercial conferences also, if you can say something about this. And can you share some ways how it could develop? I mean, in next year or 2 years or 3 years.
Yeah, I'll go first, and then I'll give Rich the rest of the time because I'm sure he has much better on this. I'll tell you that the next event I'm planning, I'm really looking at something we call an unconference, where there really isn't a structure to it and the speakers aren't decided. I'm probably going to try and get 1 or 2 keynotes. I'm going to have a cash bar. I'm going to have cupcakes, and I'm going to have food, and that's going to be it. And that'll be a little bit of some of that is to test the waters, because I don't know that I can go to a board of either a corporation or a nonprofit and say, okay, are we ready to go spend $200,000 on a conference? Will people show up, or will we just be throwing money after good? And if I come to them and say, hey, what, I'm gonna throw $10,000 after it, and 5,000 of that is going to be spent on cupcakes, I think people might show up for that, and they miss that camaraderie and have some cupcakes and do an unconference. Basically, people say, oh yeah, I'll get up and speak, and you use a Kanban type of board, and you say, I'm going to speak on rabbits, and I'm going to do a half an hour on rabbits, and if there's 3 other people that want to talk about rabbits, they get grouped together and you do a panel on rabbits. And so I like the concept of unconference. I like the concept of doing it with a very low risk investment, because I don't have a magic ball as to what's going to happen, and I predict that it's going to be difficult to get conferences back in person. People are going to be scared. I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day, if I talk about an event at the Moscone Center in San Francisco with 100,000 people there, how long is it going to be before people are comfortable to be in an enclosed room with 100,000 people?
So I've been looking at hybrid events, and my plan right now is to do like we say in the software business, do A/B testing. We're going to try both. Due to some of the cancellation mechanics of my my failed event in New Orleans, my next event's going to be in New Orleans. That's part of the contract there. And so I'm going to have an in-person event, but I'm going to keep doing online events as well. I'm going to retain, this is my plan. That's been that, I need to write a budget for this or whatever, but keep doing online events offset from the physical events and see which one wins, see what people want. I think that we're going to see, like Kevin says, we're going to see a period of adjustment. We're going to see that our
giant
next
demand for cupcakes.
Yeah,
we're going to see a giant demand for the social aspect of in-person conferences, including cupcakes, but also including unstructured, unconference kind of time where you can hang out with colleagues and think deep thoughts.
Yeah,
and
I think that's a lot. Yeah.
We miss that. We miss that a lot. We miss being with people. We miss sitting down in the evening afterwards and having a scotch together. That's just, it's part of the human experience that's so important. That's not just receiving content. But all of the benefits that we've talked about online events are very real, and I don't want to lose them. And so I'm going to keep doing the online events as well. And online events, worst case, a bad, poorly attended online event is content acquisition. At least at the end of it, I have videos of some great presentations. If only 10 people show up, fine, I have videos.
So I'll ask a question there. So you won't be doing hybrid necessarily. You'll be doing both models, not really mixed.
Yeah, I think so. And unless I see a compelling hybrid model that the venues are bought into, I don't see it being financially feasible.
Yeah. So by the way, the way you just described, and you have some parts, like a content part online, and have some like in-person activity offline.
Cupcake event. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cupcake event. So it does not necessarily have to be the same event. I mean, so you can have like two separate events.
That's my intent.
Right.
And I think we can call it hybrid event. It's
well,
just
I suppose you can, except that they're 3 months apart. It's
of course.
Yeah. It's a hybrid model, but not necessarily individual hybrid events. You're right.
Yeah. Plus, if you're online and you promise people cupcakes and then don't deliver, it could get very ugly. All right, I'll shut up about cupcakes. But my point is that I have been talking to people who attended these events before, and they're like, "Hey, when are we going to do something in person? We just want to get together." And even if we do nothing but like play videos from the past events, and we don't even have live speakers, they just want to have that camaraderie. They want to, get together in the same room, have a drink afterwards, and do that. The community building concepts.
Right.
So coming back to our previous conversation about discussion of this how to say it, unfriendly policy of the venues of venues. I mean of hotels, all this stuff. I think the success of the hybrid model, somehow depends on how those players will change.
You're right, and
will change their policy, because if they don't,
I think we're going to see. I predict that in 2022, there will be venues that spring up or retrofit specifically for what you're talking about, that these venues will be hybrid event friendly. I think we're going to see a surge in those next year. So that's my prediction. So when you see these coming, start investing in them.
Yeah, so
I'm just conscious of the time, because we only have 2 minutes left, and I just want to give everyone a chance to kind of wrap up, share any parting thoughts that you have, and
I have
for making time today.
I have one recommendation to anybody doing online speeches. Please, for the love of God, throw away your scripts. I am so tired of seeing people that are using Zoom and whatnot as a crutch, and they're just reading their speech to them. They come across so robotic. Practice your speaking, throw away the notes, use index cards, whatever. But don't read me your script. So that's my last thing I would like to leave today with. So if there's one thing we come out and fix, that would be it. And cupcakes.
Well, if we're giving speaker advice, the speaker advice that I would offer you is to look at everyone on your screen right now and notice that everyone is wearing some kind of headphones, and trying to give a presentation online without headphones causes echo and technical problems. So don't do that.
Okay.
But other than that, I really appreciate you giving the opportunity to have this conversation. It's given us an opportunity to think through some of our plans a little more thoroughly. So thanks. It's been fun.
Same.
Yeah, sometimes you have to be sad to understand it.
That's right.
So, yeah, to figure it out. Okay, guys, thank you so much for your time. We are going to wrap up. So it was a nice hour I had, and hope to be in touch after, and wish you all the best with this year plans.
Thank you.
Yeah. So and thank you everyone who joined us. Yeah, and watched online, and to those who will watch this in recording. So thank you again, and let's see. Kira,
see you next time.
yeah, see you the next time.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.